Okay, right. Well. I think that just about covers our main interests for the month. And now it's time to move into our historical TV picks of the month, and this first one. Well, I'll let you introduce it because I mean I think I chose last year's version of this in January. But would you like to dive in?
We're this month we're going for a Viking spectacular, basically.
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah.
And it's the return of Game of Thrones Light. Oh, sorry, The Last Kingdom, which is a
Game of Gnomes. Game of Gnomes. That's what it is. It's game of known persons, known places, known names, and they're just mucking about with it now. It's getting a bit silly. But
now you're being the cynical Viking fan. It's what happens when you live in the Danelaw. You see, you take it all far too seriously. But no, it's the second series based on the
Bernard Cornwell.
The Bernard Cornwell novels that it's sort of sharp with even sharper swords and pointy things rather than Baker rifles. It's the Last Kingdom series that Bernard Cornwell has had a great success actually with, and they're cracking historical novels. It's been optioned and made for the BBC, and certainly among people who know about these things and care about these things, some of the creative decisions made by the production team have raised a few eyebrows. I think it's fair to say.
They have, and I mean, the first analogy that comes to my mind is amongst people who know about how to drive a car. You might say that crashing it into a wall is not the way to go about it, but Mark, that's just a creative thing to do. And no. I mean, it is. It's a lot of fun. It's very over the top and silly. I mean, the main character, Uhtred of Babember, for example, carries his sword on his back, which is a ridiculous thing to do. Not least because he actually sees it. You see it in this first episode of the second season. He has to sort of hold the blade to get it in.
Japanese movies, it makes him look like a ninja, and it's really exciting. Visual.
Very cool. But it's just little things like, for example, actually, me and Dave Petts of the Lindisfarne excavation is going to be looking at this and possibly reviewing it when the series is finished this year. But it's little things like the way that they do take known characters, known names, known places, and they have no regard for their geographic location. In particular, for example, a place like Durham or Dunelm, as was. It's in a very notable place. It's on a high rock. It's surrounded by a river, and yet in this instance, it's basically in a field. And for some reason, it's being occupied by Vikings. It's if you're going to do Game of Thrones, do Game of Thrones. If you're going to sort of invoke, especially for example, Saint Cuthbert. Now, Saint Cuthbert is very close to my heart. He's one of my favourite Northumbrian saints in terms of the history of this area. Actually, I mentioned him in the Lindisfarne Gospels video I did a little while ago. So it's the fact that you can't avoid that they are using real historical events and people, but they're just not. They're paying no regard for. I mean, for example, they also throw in some, and as we were talking about right at the beginning of this month's podcast, they're throwing in very very modern stereotypes. For example, some Vikings are sent north into Scotland to retrieve some red-headed women, which is such a ridiculous stereotype, and something which, as far as I'm aware, was not believed. No one actually thought that people further north had red hair at that point. So it's yes, it does bother me, but only in the same way that, as I say, crashing a car to a car enthusiast is a bit annoying.
Which is fair enough. And as I said, it's I'll give you an analogy. I once worked on in my previous life working in theatre and before I got into archaeology full time. I once worked on a play that was set in Ireland just before the Easter Rising, and there was a scene in it where some soldiers searched a house, and it was being done quasi-naturalistically.
Mm-hmm.
So we researched the right uniforms, and we even got the went down to suppose which regiments were in the Dublin garrison in this particular period, so we could get the insignia right. And then we got to the technical rehearsal, and the director decided it wasn't visually interesting enough, and he wanted torches strapped to the front of the rifles like a modern SWAT team because it looked better. And actually, although it sounds like a bizarre decision, theatrically it was absolutely right.
Okay.
And because we weren't doing a documentary, we were doing a play.
Yeah, but surely you could have had torches in the pockets. I mean, that would have been.
Okay.
That would have been accurate.
We could argue with this one. I think and the other thing you have to say, being absolutely practical about it, is that to do Game of Thrones, you need the Game of Thrones budget, and The Last Kingdom doesn't have the Game of Thrones budget.
No.
And actually, if you're shooting it for financial reasons in Hungary, I think it is, certainly Eastern Europe, and if you haven't got a handy gorge with a medieval village on top to stand in for Dunelm or whatever you're going to call it this week, then you have to go with the visual look that you can give it. And so, if you're tied to one international location because that's all you can afford, that's what you're going to have to run with, and you're going to have to compromise and go for the one that's most effective for the entire series, not just one particular moment in it.
And I believe me, I'm not complaining about one particular moment. For a start, how do you pronounce Jofferwick? Oh, it's Efferwich, isn't it? No, it's Jofferwick. Anyway, or Jofferwick. Anyway, York. And we're gonna have to pick something which isn't. It doesn't get me so annoyed for next month, I think. But something else actually, which I did watch. I watched last night was the Viking Apocalypse, which was a series. Oh no, sorry, a film.
Is that the one when the Vikings in Greenland get struck by an asteroid?
It's not, and it's just not. No. It was commissioned by National Geographic as a film that examined the Ridgeway Hill massacre. It seems
outside Dorchester.
Yes. But it is nonetheless it's an interesting hour of your time, and it's I suppose what I would say is that it's presented in a very ostentatious. We're going to ask this question 10 times just so you don't leave lest your attention span breaks, kind of thing, way of editing. But it is nonetheless, it was a very interesting way of covering the topic, and I suppose what I would say is it's not as bad as I thought it would be. There you go. There's something. It's not least actually because it challenges this notion of the Vikings as being, I suppose, indisputed champions of pre-medieval Europe. A war band could turn up somewhere and get themselves massacred. It's definitely an interesting topic, and I think the title reflects in some ways that dichotomy, this idea that somehow people think Vikings were just these sort of brutal warriors who never lost a battle, but actually, in fact, they did lose a battle, and maybe apocalypse is a bit too strong a way to put it, but it certainly was a big thing.
Yeah, I think it's in the nature of these things, and I think it's certainly the case of the other somewhat controversial documentary series that we alluded to before. That titles are often given not by the production company but by the network, and they'll create a title that is essentially clickbait or viewer bait, so that and make it sound like what it isn't. I do think it's interesting actually. Do you know if this was actually it was a National Geographic Commission? Has it been shown in the UK elsewhere? Because I remember not long after the actual discovery, there was a documentary, I think it might have been on Channel 4, certainly on UK terrestrial, which looked at the same subject in a pretty cool and dispassionate way. It was looking at the forensics and so on. So it is one of those subjects, because of what it's about. I think it'll immediately attract an audience. Going right back to Julian Richards' terrific series, Meet the Ancestors, the idea of skeletons doing forensics. Time Team did it a bit, but then it's been taken on and much more detailed by other people and other programs. It's now become sort of a trope, really, in archaeological TV. That other point you made, I'm really interested by that idea that maybe the Vikings, far from being the sort of Nordic supermen of legend, could occasionally sort of have their bottoms handed to them by the opposition.
Have their donkeys handed to them.
Yes, indeed. It's a really important point to make, and you can make it about the what's often called the Roman war machine, which again was perfectly capable of screwing up big time.
On my birthday, no less.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? Which one's that? Which is this?
Well, we know. I mean, what? Sorry. What do you call it? The famous Teutoburg Forest massacre.
Oh,
right. I mean, obviously,
yeah.
like 2,000 years before I was born, but
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but which again has been
Wales isn't that isolated.
Semi-dramatized. Right, but again, that's the subject of a number of documentaries, including a recent drama doc in that series about the enemies of Rome. I can't remember what the formal title was, but
Terry was it? It was one of the Pythons, wasn't it?
No, this is much more recent than that. It went out last year. It was a big budget, lots of CGI battles. I think it was either Nat Geo or History Channel, one of the two big networks, and it took a whole series of enemies of the Roman Empire from Hannibal right through to Attila.
Right.
And did drama docs on their stories, and Teutoburg Forest was one of the main ones. It's the classic example of keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Indeed. Or don't train your enemies to the level of being a general, and then get surprised when they turn.
I think it's after what happened in Afghanistan. I think it's what the Pentagon now call blowback.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
You end up having to fight the person that you funded and trained.